So welcome back for your next 12-minute HR lesson. Today we're going to be talking about everything from Monet to Nickelback to restructuring to mediation. Hopefully at the end of this, you're going to have a little trigger in your brain to stop and think. How do you feel about Nickelback? You may not remember Nickelback. If you do remember Nickelback, it's a pretty good chance you quite liked them. There's a pretty good chance you didn't mind them. But there's an even bigger chance you didn't really want to put yourself out there as a massive Nickelback fan. Nickelback, more than any other rock band, became the whipping boys for something that is fine, but it's uncool to like. How do I feel about Nickelback? Wouldn't say I was ever a fan. I wouldn't say I ever jumped on the anti-Nickelback bandwagon. I wasn't a teenager at that stage, therefore no one really cared about how I felt about a band. And to be honest, I've never really been a big fan type person. I think the last t-shirt that I ever owned was Smashing Pumpkins, and that somewhat dates me. I like their music fine. I like some of their songs. I thought Chad Kroeger was actually a fantastic rock song writer. So the question is, what happened with Nickelback? Why is the Nickelback story interesting? It's interesting because they were perhaps the strongest example of a group that thrashed a formula and really got backlash for thrashing that formula. So what is a formula? You could look at any musician. You could look at any writer, to be honest. You could look at any sort of popular, mass-produced entertainment of any description. I'm talking Stephen King, I'm talking MCU, I'm talking all sorts of things. Everybody goes, okay, that's a look that I like, and people seem to like it, and this seems to be in the sweet spot, and I'm just going to keep thrashing that horse until it's dead. One of the things I'm not a massive fan of is Monet, because Monet was perhaps the first in this space to heavily commercialize a style of art. So yes, his water lilies are very pretty and they're very interesting and they're very innovative at the time, but my goodness, did he thrash those for commercial gain. So what was interesting to start became very repetitive the more it went on. And Monet, U2, MCU, Nickelback are guilty of thrashing their formula. Nickelback is our best example of someone or somebody who have thrashed it too far. Monet is a good example of someone who didn't take it too far. The underlying idea here that I want you to think about is going back to a tool that you are used to using. Let's get off that topic. You've probably been thinking about the comparisons and the similarities and the differences between Monet and Nickelback a lot. And so, look, I don't want to force you to think about that any more than you probably already are. It's probably keeping you up on a Sunday morning along with the Roman Empire. So let's pivot. Let's talk about a real-world situation in which this applies. Let's talk about change process. Most of you have probably dealt with it a little bit. Some of you would have dealt with this a lot. Most HR people or managers have done some form of change. Some of us have done a lot of change. Most HR people do a little bit of change once every couple of years, enough to kind of keep our hands in. And some of us do it all the time. This is the same for organizations as well. Some organizations, it's every 3 to 4 years they have to do it. They don't do it any more than they have to. Some organizations, however, the nature of their business or the nature of what they are currently going through means change is just a part of their life. So I'm going to talk about a situation for an organization that they were in that space. And this is a colleague of mine, an old colleague of mine who he and I just touch base every so often about various things. Just picked my brain on this. This doesn't feel right. I'm like, yeah, I agree, that doesn't feel right. but I was able to help articulate to him why and how it doesn't feel right. And the situation was they had someone who wasn't performing. It just wasn't working out. Was it the job or was it the employee in the job? Probably it was the employee. Probably there was some element that they didn't structure it well and they set him up to failure. But the question is around the tool that they use to solve the problem. What they reached for was, look, let's just do a change process. Let's do a restructure. We'll do that again. We'll reorganize it so that he's not in. And both me and my colleague were saying, that's a cheap shortcut. So why is it a cheap shortcut? It's a cheap shortcut because that's not the actual problem at hand. It was clearly a performance issue. And clearly that was the right tool for the job. The disruption of going through a change process, disrupting everybody else, creating that level of uncertainty, everybody directly affected, but everybody indirected, just to remove that one person who you weren't confident is succeeding and will succeed, is both unethical but also unproductive. You're doing a lot of collateral damage through that process. And this is reasonably obvious. The question is, why? Why did they do it that way? Why was that tool that they reached for when in fact it was the wrong tool? Why do they reach for the wrong tool for the job? Most organizations and most HR professionals, most managers are pretty gun-shy when it comes to doing change processes. Why was this organization particularly like, we'll just make them redundant, no big deal? Why in this particular case were they so happy to do it the wrong way? Why was it easier for them when it's hard for most people? And the short answer is they're very familiar with it. But what we're looking at here is the cognitive bias, Maslow's hammer, or the rule of the instrument. Maslow's hammer can be thought of simply this way. When you're carrying a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. To put it differently, when you know how to do a certain task, you're more likely to see that task as the solution. Your bias is your over-familiarity with the thing that you know how to do. You're not fitting the solution to the problem, you're fitting the problem to the solution. Sometimes the problem is a screw, and that hammer it's going to work, but it's going to do a lot of damage along the way. So let's get to the point, because I want you to walk away from each of these lessons going, I will do things a little bit differently next time, or more likely, I'm going to check for things a little bit more carefully next time. I'm not just going to go on autopilot and just do what I would normally do. And the lesson here is make sure that the tool that you're pulling out of your tool belt is the right tool for the problem, not the tool that you are most comfortable with. Let's talk about a different example. Let's talk about mediation. Now, a lot of people are fans of mediation. I'm less so. I think it can work. I think it can be the solution, but only in a very specific context. We'll talk about mediation another day, but the very short answer is you can't have a mediation where the two people in the room are not able to speak equally freely to each other. If you've got a dominant person, dominant personality, or a dominant position, they can speak freely and the other person can't. That's not going to work. That's not going to solve our problem. That runs the risk of just structural bullying. If that is the right tool for the job, then absolutely. If that is the right solution to the problem, then by all means do it. But don't do it just because you want it to be the right solution, or don't do it because that's what you are most comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, that's what our job is. Not everything in HR is about dealing with people problems, but a good chunk of it is, hey, look, we have a situation. It's not working out. We have a people problem. We've got an employee within the process that we're having a bit of a wobble with. We need to get them back on track so that things run smoothly. And the line manager comes to see you as the subject matter expert of all things people to come and help with that problem. And that's what we do. Part of that process is figuring out what the problem is and then picking the right tool. What I want you to take away from this is next time you have a problem, next time you diagnose what's going wrong here, make sure you reach for the right tool for the problem, not the right tool for your hand. And you're still here. The lesson's over. Everybody else has left the classroom, but you're still here. You're probably reaching for that skip button, and that's fine. No problem. Off you go. Push, push, push. If you do want to hang around and say thank you, the purpose of why we put these lessons out here is, as we said from the intro, it's advertisement for our services. It's advertisement for our courses. You don't need to do those, but please feel free to check them out. If you do want to help us out, if you do want to pay us back in a little way, sharing this podcast is probably a nice way for you to just ho-ha back. So, like, share, promote, however you found this, however you saw this, if you can share this round, we'd very much appreciate it. Thank you.